what we're going to do today is go through 15 tips and tricks that will make your workflows with WellBase a little bit easier. So without further ado, let's just get started. Tip number 1. Often you're copying and pasting surveys into the WellBase information tab, sometimes when the well is drilling multiple times a day. And over the course of the time the well is drilling, perhaps 20 or 30 different times. So let's go ahead and do that and show you how to paste a new survey into the survey tab. It's quite easy. And this prevents you from having to open up the spreadsheet loader and using the spreadsheet loader to import that new survey. So we're just going to copy and paste here. What you want to do is select the entire row, first row, and just drag down all the way down to the end. And then hit your delete key. That'll delete the previous survey. And then you want to paste the new survey in. So we'll open up an Excel spreadsheet here, and we can see how the data is formatted. Survey point, measured depth, TVD, inclination, and azimuth. And that format is the same format that you see here in the survey tab grid. The format has to be as you see here, with the survey point, the measured depth, TVD, inclination, and azimuth. And oftentimes you're not going to have the TVD position log information, but it does have to be like this. And so what I'm going to do is just select the new survey data, the survey station data. And we'll just copy it here out of Excel. And then go to your first cell, right-click in the cell, and then just select Paste. That'll paste the new survey into the Survey tab in the WellBase Information Manager. And when that's done, we can go ahead and recalculate the survey. I'll just do that right now. And now you have a new survey in WellBase, in the database, ready to go. It's been calculated, the position log has been calculated, and you did not necessarily have to import it. You just had to copy and paste it. It does save some time for you. Another little tip and trick here, we'll call it tip number 2, is that when you're selecting the survey station rows to delete, don't select the Add New row. If you select and delete the Add New row, you won't have any place to actually paste the survey in. So just when you're selecting it, go ahead and select just down to the last survey station record, hit the delete key, and then paste in your new survey. All right, first 2 tips. Now let's go to tip 3. If you have a WellBase filter applied to WellBase, and there's a filter applied right now, you'll see that this menu item or this button comes up called Filtered Wells. And if you right-click on that, it has some features that a lot of folks aren't really aware of. One nice feature is that you can view the wells, the filtered set of wells, in a satellite viewer such as Google or Bing or Esri. So let's just go ahead and do that. And we'll zoom in here. And you can see now that these oil wells are now visible in Google. So if we zoom out a little bit, we can see all of them. This is a nice little feature. Often you're interested in looking at the surface around these wells, looking for a new surface spot, looking for surface hazards. Google is a great little tool, especially when you need to see the satellite imagery. Just be aware that Google or Bing or Esri or any other application that you have set up as a satellite viewer, and really by setting up as a satellite viewer, I mean any application that will open a KML file. So for instance, if you double click on a file with an extension called DOK, Microsoft Word opens up that file. Now you can just set up to do the same thing with a KML file. Typically, the satellite viewers will open up a KML file. KML stands for Keyhole Markup Language. It's the language of Google. It's the language that you use in order to see data in these applications. So just like you can set up, and it's set up by default basically in Windows, a .doc file to be opened up by Microsoft Word, you can set up a .kml file to be opened up by any of the satellite viewers. You can do that in Windows itself. If you're not an administrator on the team, you might have to ask perhaps your IT folks to help you out. We'll close that down. Actually, one more thing I'd like to show you here. You can also view a single well in a satellite viewer using the icon right here. And let me go ahead and do that. It'll send it to you. And this has one advantage, is that it will show you, oh, let's do it again. It'll actually show you the wellbore path. So if you want to see that, that may not have a wellbore path. Find one that does. There you go. That's almost a straight hole well there. So obviously there's not much of a deviation survey there, but you get the idea. And that's the one advantage you have of using the icon here in the well base bar to see it. You can actually see the well bore path. One caveat, guys, with the satellite imagery tools, be a little careful about how much information or how much data you send. KML is a very verbose format, and some of our projects go to 500,000 wells. If your filter has 500,000 wells, you'll probably push Google or Bing or Esri to its knees. So anything around a couple hundred wells to a couple thousand wells works pretty well here. After that, it's difficult for these applications to handle that amount of data. Okay, tip number 4. You can also send your filtered results to Excel. So just like in Query Builder, where you can export a .csv file and open that file in Excel, whatever filter you have applied here in Wellbase, you can simply click and say, show that filter in Excel. And you can see the results of that filter in Excel. And here we just have a simple filter that says I want all the wells that are operated by Pioneer that have deviation surveys and well logs, and that result set, or that SQL result set, is then immediately transferred into Excel, and then you can use it from there. Which brings us to tip number 5. Now, tip number 5, let me just go ahead and open up Geo Atlas here. If I want to see this list of filtered wells in Geo Atlas on my map, I can just say highlight those wells in Geo Atlas. And let me just go ahead and do that. I'll bring up Geo Atlas here. And you can see that those wells are now highlighted on your Geo Atlas map. This is a nice little feature. oftentimes you're making a lot of layers and you're applying filters to different layers because you're trying to find, you're trying to only work with or see a filtered list of wells in your well-based layers. This makes it just easier to find it, and you can do it directly from well-base. Tip number 6, use the quick filter tool. The quick filter tool has actually been in the software for, well, I guess probably 6 or 7 years now, but folks really haven't used it much, which is a shame because you can make 60, 70, 80% of the filters that you make commonly without actually having to go to Query Builder. Query Builder is a fine tool when you want to create filters from multiple data types. So for instance, data completions, and DSTs, and well header data, and you need to make a filter using all of those data types. But the quick filter tool, and I'll just bring it up here, allows you to make simpler filters, but filters that you would make all the time. So for instance here, I want to see all the wells that are operated by Encana that have surveys, and perhaps they have logs, maybe they're gamma ray logs. And that's a filter that is a very common filter. So we'll just hit OK here. And now there are 40 wells here that are operated by Encana that have digital logs and also have deviation surveys. And you can see that that filter has been applied to the well-based information manager automatically. If you were to go back into the quick filter tool, that information would still be there. And then you can just, if you like the filter, you can hit the Save As button and save that filter. You just call it Encana Wells. Once you save it, the filter does remain applied automatically in well-base. So use the quick filter tool as much as you can. It has wildcards available, so it's very easy, for instance, and because a lot of wells might be Encana Production Company, Encana Exploration, those operator names are infinitely variable. You can use the wildcards to create the filter. It also has all the data here. So for instance, if I just wanted to see cores in the Menalusa formation, I could just say, I just want to see wells that have core data in the Menalusa formation. All right, brings us now to tip number 7. Use the replace tool to find and replace data in the scout ticket. Lots of folks really don't know about the replace tool, and it's here under wells in the menu under wells. And what it allows you to do is find and replace data in bulk in the scout ticket. So for instance, if I were to go here and select status, and I want to find all of my oil, and let's just put a wildcard in here because you can do that. Anything with oil, and I want to replace it with Scott, my name. Let's just do that so we can see what happens. It'll go ahead and replace in bulk any status beginning with oil with the status Scott. Now this is a fairly large hammer, so be cautious with it. But many times you're going to want to do this, especially if you have a blessed list of statuses or some other list of, who knows what it might be. Maybe it's classifications that you want to use within your company, and those are the only pieces of data that you want to use, the names within the company. This is a great way to do it. Now, if I hit replace all, it will go ahead and replace all of those statuses in the database. Now just remember, if you have a huge project, and almost all of us have huge projects, this might take a few minutes to do. Once the replacement is complete, you can cancel out of here. And you can see all the statuses have been changed to Scott. It's a nice little feature, especially if you have to change data in bulk. Just be aware, if you have to do it, probably a good idea to do it on a test project first. Make sure that the information and the data is correct, and then go ahead and do it on your production project. But I get, over the years, I've probably gotten dozens, if not hundreds, of requests to replace, bulk replace data within the applications. And we've always had it here. It's just a little bit hidden, but please use it judiciously, and I think it'll make your life a little bit easier. Which brings us up to tip number 8. And tip number 8 is to sort the strat column alphabetically, and so all of your formations are visible, and make sure every geologist is using their own individual strat column. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, one, you don't want to start deleting formations out of your public strat column and using your public strat column as your personal strat column. Most of the applications in GeoGraphix filter formation lists via the active strat column. So if you've deleted all of the formations out of your public strat column, you're not going to see any of those formation picks anywhere else in the applications. So the best way to handle things is, one, sort ascending, and then update your strat order for your public strat column. Once I do that, that'll be the stratigraphic order for the public strat column. Oftentimes, the public strat column has 4,000 to 5,000 formation names. You're certainly not going to order them stratigraphically. So we'll update the strat order there. And even if your application formation order is stratigraphic, I close down here and find, you can see here that if the public strat column is active, the stratigraphic order for the public column is alphabetical. This is good because it allows you to find your formations when they show up in lists and the public strat column is active. However, not a good idea to do this for normal work, and especially if you're working in a specific area of the basin with a specific strat column. Much better idea to use your own personal strat column. And I'll just change that to tips. And you can see this project is in the Permian, so the formations are Permian formations, and they're ordered stratigraphically, Santa Rosa, Yates, all the way down to the Wolfcamp Formation. I'll go ahead and make that my active strat column. And you can see here that now my formations are ordered stratigraphically. You'll also notice, however, that some of the formations that you were previously seeing are missing. And that's because those formations aren't in the public strat column. That's fine. Many times you just don't want to see those formation picks. However, if you delete a lot of data or a lot of those formations out of the public strat column, you're not going to be able to see them at all. So just a good tip and trick, order the public one alphabetically, use your own personal strat column. If you, I have said don't delete any of your formations out of your public strat column. There's one caveat to that. If the formation does not have a pick associated with it, or there are formations that do not have picks associated with them, you can go ahead and delete those from the public strat column if you want to. If a lot of times, as data is coming in from vendor data sources, you'll get formations that are associated with maybe completions, and they'll have no picks associated with them. If you want to, you can go ahead and delete those formations from your public strat column. In the next release, we'll actually have a little button in Strat Column Manager that will allow you to delete formations from your public column that do not have picks associated with them. Which brings us to tip number 9. This is a real simple, quick and dirty little tip, but oftentimes you're always copying well IDs out of the application and then pasting them into some other application. If you go here to the Scout ticket in Wellbase and you just double click here, you can copy that directly out. It's very easy to copy. Same here. Copy it out, and then you can paste it in another application. Tip number 10. Create a filter by using the Find tool and then selecting the Create Filter checkbox. Again, always creating single well filters because we need to find that filter. We need to find that well in some other application, or we need to apply that one well filter to some other application. If we go up here to the Find tool, and I'll go ahead and just change this to well ID. Paste that well ID in there. I can save it as a named well-based filter. And when I do that, hit Find Next, dialog's going to pop up, and then I can save the filter name, and I will call it Connor 15 1. Save that. And you can see here that the Connor 15 filter has been saved. And that's just saved in the filter directory with all your other filters. So instead of that having to go to Wellbase, find the well, go to Query Builder, creating the filter in Query Builder, saving it in Query Builder, and then applying the filter in another application, you can just do it here. And it's not just for well IDs, right? So for any other Scout field that you want to create a filter on, whether it's status or whatever, you can go ahead and just say find and very quickly create a named well-based filter right here. Saves you a few steps. I'll go ahead and turn that off. Yep, no active filter. I will bring my original filter back on here. Which brings us to tip number 11, dealing with sidetracks. Now this is really common in Texas, but it's common just about everywhere. You'll have a pilot well, and sometimes the pilot well has all the data associated with it, but the sidetrack is the well that's actually producing. So you want all the data, the well data, to be associated with the sidetrack, not the pilot. Reasonably easy way to do that in GeoGraphix using the Clone Well tool. So let me go ahead and just select pilot well. Oops. Again. You can see for this particular well, most of the data is associated with the pilot, but the well also has a sidetrack. And you can see that's the sidetrack, same UWI, except the last 4 digits, actually the 11th and 12th digit, indicates that this well has a sidetrack, and that's the UWI for it. You'll notice here that for the most part, the well doesn't have any data. So what we want to do is we want to get the data from the pilot to the sidetrack. So what I would do, the easiest thing to do, is I would just rename the sidetrack first to something else. Let me just go ahead and do that. Change the well ID. So I'll just go edit well ID. Oops. Let me just find that. And I'll take that filter off. And use my find tool. Find next. Then I'll go ahead and edit that well ID, because there might be some information in this pilot that I want to keep. So I'm going to say that's old. And now I'm going to go to the pilot well. And I'm going to use the cloned well feature. So the way you find that is just go to wells, add a cloned well, and just put the pilot UWI in there, and that will clone all of the data in the pilot well into the sidetrack. So I'll save it there. It was cloned successfully. And now I may or I may not want to get some of the data out of the pilot well, right? So for instance, I might have production tests or tubing or casing or completion associated with the pilot, not the sidetrack. So I can easily do that, and I can just say delete data. And for a one well filter, all right, so I will select a one well filter, and it'll be my pilot well filter. I can delete the information that I don't want associated with the pilot because I've already cloned all of the well data into the sidetrack. I'll just, what do we got here? Completions, production tests, etc. Just hit OK, and that data will be deleted from the pilot. Now you're pretty much good to go. You also have a well, though, remember, that we renamed. That's the original sidetrack. You can go ahead and delete that now if you don't want to save any of the data from that well, because that well, you know, the pilot may have had, the sidetrack may have had some information, some well data that you want to keep. Often that's not the case. In that case, just go ahead and delete it. Great. So that brings us to tip number 12. Use a magic number like 999 to identify your proprietary core completion DST data. And the reason why you want to do that is that vendor data will not use these identifiers, and so data will be preserved during an import. Your proprietary data will be preserved during an import, even if the well is not protected. So what do we sort of mean by that? Let's just go ahead and get back to our original list of wells here. So let's just go into completion. Typically, your completion IDs, your DST IDs will be 1, 2, 3, 4, because that's just simply the way it comes in from the vendor. If you're adding your own proprietary data to any of these tabs, go ahead and use a magic number. So for instance, I'm going to add completion, my own completion information, and I'm going to use 9999. So oftentimes you're not going to import the data, or, well, add the data directly through Wellbase. You're going to add the data through the spreadsheet loader if it's your proprietary data. If that's the case, just make sure that the ID, which is part of the key, is your magic number. I'm just using 9999. You could use whatever it is that you want. But this prevents data, your proprietary data, from being overwritten by the vendor data when new vendor data comes in. And oftentimes, you want to preserve your proprietary data. Tip number 13. When creating a well-based layer, use the parse tool in Layer Crate to limit the number of digits in the API number and the number of words in fields like operator. This prevents you from having to do a lot of over-posting corrections on your well-based layer. So we'll just go over here And we'll make that well spots layer active. And let me just go ahead and, yeah, there you go. And I'm going to zoom in here a little bit to Geo Atlas. And you'll see here that what I have posted on the layer is operator, well name, well number, and my API number. Zoom out a little bit. So since that's my active layer, I'm just going to update that layer. And for each of these posts, you can use the parse tool. What does the parse tool do? Well, it's down here. It's called parse. And for your data, what it allows you to do is limit the amount of data that's getting posted to the map. So for instance, here with operator, you'll probably have 3 or 4 different ways operators being described for Encana or Pioneer or Concho or Marathon. There'll be Exxon Exploration, Exxon Oil and Gas Company, Exxon this, Exxon that. You don't really need that. You just need to post the first word. So you can just say, I just want to post the first word here, so you don't actually see all that other data. For data like well ID, which is numeric data, you can choose just to post certain digits. In an API number, of course, the first 2 digits is the state code, and if your project is just in one state, you just basically don't need to see that information. And the end digits, some folks want to see the completions, some folks want to see the sidetracks, but if you don't, you can go ahead and just say, you know, all I want to do is see my API numbers from the 2nd digit to the 10th digit, and I'll go ahead and I'll update that layer. After I update the layer, I'll only see, for instance, the first word in operator, not all the words, and I'll just see the digits that I want to see in my well ID. And the reason why you want to do this, of course, is to prevent you having to do a lot of overposting corrections. So we'll go ahead and let this finish, and I'll show you what I mean. Again, one of those features that probably isn't used a whole lot, but it can make your workflows a little bit easier and prevent you from having to do a lot of work down the line. So if I zoom in again, see, yeah. So now I'm just looking at the API number from the 2nd digit to the 10th digit. All these wells are in the Permian. They're all in Texas. So I don't need to see that extraneous information, and I just don't have a whole lot of overposting problems. Great. Brings us now to tip 14. I love this tip. This is use the document library to add hyperlinks to your well-based layers. I'll zoom out here. Go back to well-base. So there's a little button down here called Document Library. People don't use this much, but it is quite powerful. What it does is it allows you to associate URLs, hyperlinks basically, from a number of different formats. So, you know, there's URLs that start with HTTP or HTTPS. Another protocol is FTP, so it could be FTP : there's actually a file protocol. So if you want to link your wells to data on your own network, you can use a file protocol, and that's in the documentation. But we're just going to do it for online data. So the data that's the protocol is HTTP or HTTPS. So why would we want to do that? Well, there's a lot of data out there from public sources that you might want to link to these wells and then be able to bring up that data by selecting the hyperlink on the map. So one way to do it is just to add the URL here that is associated with the well. Now, obviously, that's going to be time consuming, especially if you have a lot of wells. So the easier way to do that is, let's go over here, use the spreadsheet loader. So one thing we can do, and I'll just actually bring it up from here. It's a little bit easier. So I'll go File, Import, Spreadsheet, and I have that one file on my desktop. I'll go ahead and open that up. Oops. And something folks really don't know is that one of the data types that you can import is documents. So you can associate a UWI with a URL. So now this, the whole URL thing, you'll notice that this URL is, well, pretty complicated here. And that's because the URL has been encoded. So all of those percentage signs and some of the information here, basically it's an encoded URL. And it can be very difficult to understand. So you could go out, and this data is coming from the Railroad Commission, you can go out and you can take a look at your data for a specific well in the Railroad Commission, and you'll notice that there's a URL associated with it, but you don't really know what that means, right? So if you don't really know what that means, it's going to be hard to import those URLs for, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 wells. So I can get around that. Well, fortunately, you can go out to Google, and if you go to urldecoder.org and just type in URL decoding, you can come up with some of these little free tools. And the reason why you would want to use this is that I need to actually know what's going on here if I want to import the data. So I'm just going to copy it out of here, and I'm going to decode it. So I'll paste and decode it. And so that's what the Railroad Commission's really asking for here. So all of this is boilerplate up until the time you get to value. And value is actually the 2nd through 10th digit of the API number. So now that I know how things work here, I go, okay, this is going to be fairly easy. I'll just create a column with all my API numbers from the 2nd to 10th digit, and I'll write a little macro or a little formula in Excel to create all of these URLs with the same format. And believe me, guys, it's well worth doing, because once you get all of this data into the database and all of those URLs associated with the well, you can then go to Wellbase. Oops. And create a layer and have those URLs associated with your wells in the map and the data attributes bin. So I'll go ahead and update the layer again. You'll notice that I have hyperlinks selected. Now that I have imported, and I just imported one here, right? Just one of these URLs and it's associated with it. I'm going to go ahead and create the layer. And when I create the layer, that hyperlink is going to be associated with the well in the data attributes bin. So I'll go ahead and cancel here. I think it's that well. I want to see that well in Geo Atlas. And there's my well. Whoops. That Tom Mills well. And now I can right click on that. I think it's there. And I can see all those URLs. Now I can just click on that URL and watch what happens. Gets me to the Railroad Commission. And now I can, for instance, download a well log. So it takes a little work, but once you do it, you basically only have to do it once. And it just requires a little bit of the ability to write a little formula in Excel. And then you can associate all of the wells on your maps and layers in GeoGraphix with URLs, with data associated someplace else. Well worth doing. We have a number of customers who do it regularly. Also, if you have documents or the data is not, and that you want to associate is not on, a public website, and it's on your own network, you can also do that. And you can associate more than one URL with a well. Okay, which brings us up to tip number 15. And tip number 15 is to use the conditional pi tool to create visual filters. What do I mean by that? The conditional pi tool is one of those tools that is also a little underutilized, but it's got a lot of value because it allows you to filter your data visually. And we have big projects, and so being able to do this allows you to focus in on the areas where the data is without creating a lot of layers or applying a lot of filters to your layers or applying a lot of filters in other places in GeoGraphix. So let's take a look at this. I created a conditional pi filter. I'll just make that filter the active one. And what this conditional pi layer has, there you go. So you see here, I've created a conditional pi layer with wells that have certain tops available. Yates, Grayburg, and Clear Fork. Notice that I've used the wildcard here because in many cases, Grayburg and Clear Fork will be named in various ways. Usually they're started with clear and gray. However, the spelling after that is probably 2 or 3 different ways. So if you want to see all the wells with those particular formations, you can use the wildcard. And if I close this down and then just zoom in a little bit, I can see the wells that have all 3 of those formations picked. you tend to want to do this for a couple reasons. The first reason is you're always making cross sections, and you may only want to make cross sections on wells with certain marker beds have been picked. The other reason why you want to do it is you want to make a cross section where you know these wells don't have picks for these 3, 4, 5, 6 formations. So I want to go ahead and make a cross section just with those wells so I can do the picking myself. You can also, and this is sort of an interesting thing, get a little creative with how the tool works. So if I make wells with digital logs active, and update that layer, you can see here that I changed my map size a little bit. The default is 500 feet, but I'm going to change that to 250 feet. So why would I do that? Well, if I go to this well here, the outer part of the donut indicates wells with the formation picks, which formation picks are available. But the inside of the donut here indicates wells that have digital logs. You can do this, and the reason why you would want to do it is it's a little bit easier to see the data. So you can actually visually filter on more data doing it this way, just easier. So for instance, maybe I had, I just put digital logs in that one conditional pi layer. Well, sometimes it would show up here on the bottom, sometimes it wouldn't. This is just an easy way to see a lot of information all at once. So use the conditional pi tool. Play around with it. It's got a lot of features that you may not actually know that it has, including, for instance, the ability to use wildcards. And it does allow you to it prevents you from having to build so many layers, right? Because a lot of times we're just building layers with filters applied because, we want to figure out what wells have what data. You don't necessarily need to do that. You can use the conditional pi tool, build conditional pi layers, save those layers, put them in your global AOI, and you're good to go. All right, folks, that is the last tip. That was tip number 15. Thank you very much for joining me today.